So, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of our Embracing Global Markets webinar series. My name is Thomas Dyatt. I'm working for an executive agency established by the European Commission. And today's webinar is brought to you as usual by the Enterprise Europe Network. For those of you who have not heard yet about the Enterprise Europe Network, please allow me to spend a few words on it. We are big, modestly speaking. We are one of the biggest service provider for growth-oriented small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as for startup and scale-ups. We are offering a wealth of services to help companies to grow, including, for example, internationalization services, helping companies to find business partners cross-border, advising companies how to benefit from preferential trading terms linked to free trade agreements or any other kind of trade agreements the EU, the European Union, has signed with other major markets around the globe. But also innovation is at the heart, or as one of the main pillars of the Enterprise Europe Network. So we're helping businesses to engage in technology transfer, to sell and procure IP. We advise them on intellectual property rights, and we help them to innovate. So also with finding partners, research and development partners cross-border in other markets, other countries, and help them to engage in research and development with those partner organizations, very often linked to European research programs or international research programs such as Horizon Europe or Eureka. Services helping companies to embrace more sustainable business models have become much more popular recently. And of course, we help companies to navigate the EU single markets, including our industrial rules and regulations and standards. Last but not least, I also would like to mention that the Enterprise Europe Network is funding or is providing access to finance services. So in particular for startups, helping them to how to deal with business angels, depending on the stage of development they are, and how to engage with equity investors. So this in a nutshell are our services. And if you're interested receiving these services, don't hesitate reaching out to us via our public websites. We have there our official contact points listed, so you can reach out to them and ask for support. And this brings me straight now to our today's webinar on doing business in the United States, what you need to know about import customs issues. And I believe there has been quite a resurgence of transatlantic trade recently. I recently learned that the United States have become Germany's most important trading partner again after many decades. The US is back. And of course, this will be quite similar to other EU member states. So I invite now Yvonne to take the stage and introduce the speakers and the main topic to be dealt with today on customs issues. Yvonne, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, we're seeing the same thing. There's a major uptick of transatlantic trade in both directions, actually. So I can absolutely second that assessment. We're happy to do this webinar series with you. And side note on that, EEN partners who are listening out of Europe can also reach out to us directly, and we would be happy to discuss a bespoke program for their specific constituency if that's of interest to them. And again, my name is Yvonne Bendinger-Rothschild. I'm the Executive Director of the European American Chamber of Commerce in New York, and we're part of the consortium in the US to be the intake partner for inquiries for the Enterprise Europe Network. And our program today, our webinar, is going to be an update on the state of transatlantic trade and what you need to know about recent trade policy and customs-related activities. We will be talking about the EU and US joint efforts in the context of the Trade and Technology Council. some of the legal impediments of transatlantic trade, including duties and tariff regimens, including, very importantly, enforcement issues related to extraterritorial jurisdictions, which is a hot topic these days. We will discuss the remaining supply chain challenges that we are still facing, including new sourcing patterns that have developed over the last couple of years, and several bottlenecks that companies are still dealing with. We will be addressing trade restrictions, what exporters need to know about, among others, steel and aluminum tariffs. And we have a specialty topic today also, which we felt was relevant to this audience, which is special customs issues as they relate to tech-related products, shipping tech-related products across the globe, and what you need to know to do that effectively and without getting yourself into trouble. We have an amazing panel today. Among our speakers is, one of our speakers is Simon Kay. He's the CEO of Jaguar Freight, a licensed freight forwarder and a so-called non-vessel operating carrier. Simon is an expert on expert on global supply chain and logistics issues. We also have Michelle Schultz. She's the managing partner at Schultz Trade Law, a law firm focused on trade and customs issues. And then Noah Sussman, the global senior sales director of TechX. TechX is an importing entity of record that carries the financial and legal and compliance risk at the time of customs clearance when you deal with tech-related products and bringing them across borders. So let's jump right into the conversation. Michelle, could you start with just a broad overview of where we are on the EU and US efforts in the context of the Trade and Technology Council?
Yes, and it's nice to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm actually speaking to you from Germany right now, even though I'm from Dallas. So the first time that I sat here by this window was 1985. And I wanted to mention that because we're now in 2024. The fish have been here the whole time, but you may have noticed things have changed. Things have changed quite a bit. So thinking about technology, we now have to worry about things like AI, space, social media, TikTok and our children, forced labor, global warming, whole new world now in 2024. In 2021, the Trade and Technology Council was established, and it was established by European Council Commissioner von der Leyen, as well as European Council President Charles Michel, and finally, of course, US President Biden. And that was June 2021. This council was formed in order to modernize trade policy as well as align the European Union with the United States. We have always been pretty aligned. And now, with all these complexities surrounding us, it's more important than ever that we all agree on certain norms, even values. And the idea here is democratic values, meaning anti-authoritarian. The Trade and Technology Council has done a lot to modernize trade policy. They're looking at online platforms to help encourage and improve these areas that I'm talking about now. They have also even developed a best practices guide. And so it's kind of nice to see the European Union and the US working together to agree on norms and values and putting that in writing and putting it actually into effect. So that's kind of where we are right now. And I can tell you a little bit more about how it works in the US, but I'm gonna turn it back over to you and we can go from there.
Yeah. So what are we seeing is trade across the Atlantic, and I'm going to, ask that to all of our panelists. And I start with you, but then I would like to hear from Simon and Noah as well. From what we're seeing, is trade across the Atlantic getting easier or more complex?
In my view, more complex, but possibly better. We have in trade, we've begun to have certainly more regulations, more restrictions. And as a trade attorney, I'm seeing a lot more enforcement by customs in the US. They're coming down hard, but it's also an effort to modernize because for many years we did not address things like human trafficking and slave labor. We didn't address climate control. We didn't even dream of AI. So now it's complicated and everything is complicated. And there's the trade practices and trade patterns are starting to mirror this complexity.
Yeah, Simon, what are you seeing?
Sure. Thanks, Yvonne. And firstly, I want to thank the European American Chamber of Commerce and the Enterprise Europe Network for hosting this panel and this discussion. As far as transatlantic trade is concerned, I think historically, and this remains true, it is a well-established, mature market. There are little peaks and valleys with regards to trade on the transatlantic, which is not the same in other trade lanes. So we see huge fluctuations in trade with regards to rates and volumes on the Asia-Europe and Asia-US market, and they can be very unstable. The transatlantic trade is a mature market. It is relatively consistent. That being said, trade westbound from Europe to the United States is much stronger than east. Considerably more so than an exporter. So we see that market continuing to be strong, robust, but I will concur with Michelle with regard to regulatory issues, customs inspections, and the such like. The US is becoming much more aggressive in that regard.
And Noah, what are you seeing when it comes to tech crossing borders, tech products and restrictions we might be dealing with?
So firstly, thank you, Yvonne, for inviting me to join this panel. Very happy to be here, and to the EACC. So thank you. And yeah, it's a very interesting topic, and I think it's very timely just with the explosion of AI, artificial intelligence. I was just yesterday at a conference, a data center conference, and the talk is obviously of global expansion of data center offshoring for a lot of these multinational companies who want to really compete in an international market. They need to build out data centers and to get their tech into all different global locations. So that is proving to be quite challenging because of the fact that, there's, as we've mentioned already, there's a lot of regulations and compliance, especially when it comes to the AI equipment, both out of the US where it can go because of obviously the geopolitical situation and the especially between China and US and vice versa. But just generally, there are a lot of restrictions associated with the movement of tech, and a lot of regulations, permits, licenses. So if one is looking to navigate the cross-border transactions when it comes to tech, they really do need to be on top of things and understand that it's not as simple as sticking it in a FedEx box and shipping it from New York to Los Angeles.
to say the very least. Michelle, let's drill
Yes.
into that a little bit. Could you give us a sense of the state of the regulatory framework, what comes in and out of the US and what agencies are involved? And I think we have a
Sure.
slide for that.
Yeah, let's bring the slide up and I can kind of talk to this slide. First of all, it's important to note that Customs is the enforcement agency at the border, and Customs has to enforce the regulations in the US of over 40 different agencies. So when you look at these other agencies, keep in mind, Customs is the enforcer. They primarily have focused on imports throughout history, but now they're focusing on everything. So what we have here is Customs as the police at the border and the import agency looking at tariffs. Are you paying the correct taxes? Are you classifying your duties correctly, valuing them correctly? And then we have for dual use items, the Export Administration Regulations, which is under the US Department of Commerce. On the other hand, if it's not under Commerce, it's going to be under the Department of State. And that would be for defense articles, the International Traffic in Arms Regulations. Encompassing all of this is the Office of Foreign Assets Control under Treasury. Office of Foreign Assets Control is, in my experience, the most heavy-handed of all these agencies. And Office of Foreign Assets Control has been actively bringing action against foreign companies, non-US companies, if they have a tie to the US. And so the extraterritorial jurisdiction becomes a real issue with OFAC. Overall, we're seeing more enforcement, both on the export side and the import side, with the China tariffs at 25%. We've got aluminum and steel now at higher tariffs. And of course, we had the Boeing and Airbus World Trade Organization conflict, which resulted in retaliatory tariffs against things like olives and cheese. So the US has certainly taken an enforcement approach.
So what does one do to make sure that you're not going to find yourself in in a situation where your product isn't moving across customs? What's new in that space that that has happened over the last 6 to 8 months that companies now have to deal with and they didn't have to deal with in the past?
We have seen some extremely interesting new cases in the past 6 or 7 months, actually, where Customs is enforcing the regulations of another agency, and Customs may not exactly understand those regulations. So to give you an example, the US Census Bureau regulates what must be reported in export filings, and they track all of this data in the US. It includes valuation, classification, many different issues, and Census defines how those items need to be properly recorded in the foreign trade regulations. Customs is now enforcing the Census regulations. So we had an instance where, Customs tries their best. I know they work hard. They were enforcing the Census regulations on exports. And in my opinion, they had the valuation wrong. So we ended up with penalties, and we've had 6 penalties already this year in the past 8 months against companies for incorrect value, where I can tell you the foreign trade regulations specify the value should be otherwise.
Hmm.
So Yeah,
So that
thank
really
you.
is a problem that started a couple of years ago when it came to or when it as you know, as it relates to technology, because you know, have we made any serious progress when it comes to tracking shipments, tracking you know, movement across borders? And Simon, this is a question for you. I mean, this is still very paper-based. How sophisticated have people become, or what can be done to get them more up to speed on all the different tracking of documents, you know, pulling in the documents or tracking that other agencies require? What are you seeing in your daily life as it relates to that?
Sure, yes. I think that, and Michelle sort of highlighted it well. There's a lot of, and this might be surprising to some people, there's a lot of bureaucracy in the United States. So for a country that is, you know, free market, you know, modern capitalist, leading capitalist country in the world, it's incredibly bureaucratic. And it is also that not sophisticated, or as sophisticated as people would expect with regards to tracking, visibility, monitoring, and the use of technology. And customs, as Michelle says, is the enforcer, is the police at the point of entry and or the point of exit. But they are massively understaffed, and you know, massively underfunded. And so it is problematical. That being said, from our perspective, you know, we have, to address these things, we have an onboarding team at Jaguar that when we do start business with any new prospect, we dot every I and cross every T ahead of time. We don't want to have situations that I know unfortunately exist where I don't know if it was Noah who said it, you know, put something in a FedEx box and just send it out. You don't want something to arrive in the US and get stopped because you haven't addressed, you know, all of the regulatory issues that come with that shipment, whatever they may be, whatever the product is, whatever agency needs to be satisfied. And so, you know, we will hold shipments at origin in anticipation of getting approval that documents are correct, language is correct, licenses are correct, whatever is required. So I think the message that I'm trying to get over to the audience is the system is bureaucratic here, and you need to take that into consideration.
But isn't it, I want to stay on this geopolitical angle or environment that we're in. So, I mean, and not that this has not been complex in the past, but we're dealing with sanctions, incoming and outgoing export sanctions, what's allowed in and what's allowed out. You know, sanctions, especially the ones against Russia, are in a constant state of updating. People are being added. I'm sure that there are massive amounts of sanctions against Iran that are constantly changing. And how is one able to keep up with this? And then how does this all tie in with new sourcing patterns, nearshoring, reshoring? Can you give us a sense, Simon, on how is that all playing out in real life?
Sure, sure. So, you know, what you've just said is encapsulated by, you know, what I refer to, and I think a lot of people are experiencing, is like global supply chain disruption. And I think since 2020, when COVID hit, we have been in a constant state of global supply chain disruption. And that is epitomized by fluctuations and wild fluctuations with rates, wild fluctuations with schedule reliability. You know, we've got the issues in the Middle East at the moment. The Suez Canal is effectively unusable for the majority of international cargo. And so, you know, you have vessels that are now sailing around Africa, around the Cape of Good Hope, adding transit times, taking vessels out of rotation. And this is sort of like, you know, the butterfly effect, it affects everything. You know, it's not isolated to that trade lane that has to use the Suez Canal, because those vessels are global. They impact other trade lanes. So we see just across the world all of these impacts, whether it be on rates and schedules. You mentioned Ukraine, Russia. You know, there's as Michelle mentioned, there was the tariff issue. So, you know, I won't get political, but depending on which which party comes into power in the election in November, we're going to see greater a greater focus on tariffs. And I think either political party is going to focus on tariffs. Not wishing to be political, but we have a trade war with China that is focused, and the main tool is tariffs. From the Republican side, from the Democratic side, it's a tax and it's income to the country. So we're seeing a lot of focus on tariffs, and that's, as Michelle said, is enforced at the border by customs. We're seeing, as I said, rates fluctuate globally. On the transatlantic, I think we've seen, and I think I have a slide to this that shows, so this is sort of like the global impact on rates, and specifically on the transatlantic, where I know a lot of the viewers are listening from and watching from. We see a direct relation between rates going up and schedule reliability coming down. And so we're in this current state of supply chain disruption. And so as you see, and the black line here, rates going up depending on what the situation is globally, and then schedule reliability coming down. They're directly related. So
I mean, if I may
that's sort of
jump
where
in
we
for a
currently
second.
are at the moment.
I think it's curious that ships are taken out of commission, and I think that's directly related to this particular graph, because if it's not worth, if it's too expensive to run the ship, the margins, I mean, there's some price elasticity, but if it's 4x. How much, can you, it may be worthwhile delaying the shipment because you can't make any profit on the product that is on that ship if you're paying 4 times as much or 10 times as much for the shipping. I mean, what are we seeing in terms of, nearshoring
Yeah.
movement of manufacturing?
Yeah, what we're seeing is, and again, because of this constant state of supply chain disruption, we're seeing supply chains becoming more diverse. So, historically and previously, manufacturing was and sourcing was focused in whether it be Southeast Asia and China or in Europe for particular products. Companies are now diversifying their supply chain, looking at other areas to source products from, to ensure that they have what is the most important thing in anyone's supply chain today is flexibility. And it is incredibly important to have flexibility within your supply chain. So we're seeing manufacturing move to, whether it be Mexico and Central and South America, to Eastern Europe, to India, to a variety of other countries in Southeast Asia. So we're seeing manufacturing and sourcing shift around the globe. So which brings flexibility, but it also brings complexity. And so the ability to manage that supply chain for importers, for exporters, it just becomes more and more focused, more and more important.
Yeah. Michelle, let's jump back a little bit on the tariffs, steel and otherwise. And are there any developments in that regard?
Yes, and this is an area that you want to consult your expert partners on, whether it's your customs broker, your logistics provider, your auditor. You want to consult an expert on this because the tariffs are changing constantly. For example, we had an exception for de minimis items, which means if it's under a certain value, we're not going to worry about those 25% China tariffs that everybody's so upset about. Well, that is changing. The Commerce Department is in the process of changing that to where there's no de minimis. The small packages Noah referenced used to come in under the radar. They're not going to be under the radar so much. And I find that very interesting as far as tariffs and what's important. We've also noticed there is nearshoring, and sometimes we call it friendshoring, in particular with, let's say, Mexico. A lot of companies that I work with have moved to Mexico. Then they want to use the US-Mexico Free Trade Agreement. Customs pays special attention to whether you're declaring the correct country of origin. And the country of origin does not mean just where you packaged it. It has to be where the item actually took on a completely different character, an essential character. So while nearshoring and friendshoring to Mexico is a really great idea, I'm seeing more scrutiny on claims to country of origin where customs does not believe that it's actually a NAFTA or USMCA now item. Country of origins also become extremely important. And one more I have to mention is the aluminum. Recently, we saw tariffs increased on aluminum extrusions, and it's incredibly complex when you read what all is covered. But suffice it to say, extrusions are broadly defined. If something is made of aluminum, it is very likely an extrusion. Something that has a shape, it's made of aluminum, extrusion. That has changed the whole playing field for anyone dealing in aluminum products. So much changing.
Yeah, interesting. And Noah, how does this affect your daily business? With I mean, you already mentioned the growth of AI, data warehouses being built everywhere. There's technology moving across borders at a lightning speed. What are you seeing? How are buyers and sellers of technology getting smarter about managing their exports?
So thank you. It's definitely a very pertinent question, I think, in today's environment. And interestingly enough, it's a topic that hasn't got a lot of awareness. Most companies are not aware that you have to have a registered entity in the foreign country, whether you're importing to the US or you're exporting out of the US or into different global locations. You have to have a registered entity. That registered entity has to have the correct licenses, which, obviously goes into regulatory compliance. And, to Michelle's point as well, is that if you get, let's say in the US, you import on your entity, but now you get into trouble with customs, you get blacklisted. But you may not realize that, so that the next time you actually import, your goods get stopped by the mere fact that you have already breached a regulation. And now you're sitting with, an issue with your goods sitting in customs. And one of the things we've seen is typically the movement across border has been left to the operations person in a company, the shipping person, with no thought given to the risk that it places on the company. And what we've actually tried to do, we've just released a paper 2 days ago, a white paper called Mind the Gap, and explaining the import regulations related to tech, but is to try and create awareness on the CEO executive level, because the cost to a company both to the go-to-market strategy. So if, for example, they don't have proper process in place and they ship, the goods get stuck in customs, they could be there for months, they could be destroyed. There's certain countries that you cannot import, like as Michelle mentioned, country of origin. Besides the tariff, there are certain countries like India that don't allow for Apple products to be imported in there. So a company who is not taking cognizance of the fact that there are regulatory requirements, there's legal requirements, you need to have a registered entity, are going to put themselves in a position where they can end up either losing the equipment, incurring additional penalties, and their competitive strategy of getting to market and getting into the foreign country and up and running can be severely impacted. And to give you an idea, is that I have a client who was saying about their customer, they didn't want to, they left it to the logistics warehouse person to take care of the shipping. And they would just send packages. I think it was actually the engineers, small packages. To Michelle's point, it wasn't big packages of small, tech equipment to China. And they slipped through customs until one got stuck. And customs did an audit on every single shipment that this company had brought in. And most countries, customs can audit up to 5 to 7 years post shipment. So a lot of people are like, oh, as long as it gets through customs, I'm okay. But they don't realize that the real risk sits post import. And they did an audit on every single shipment, and they levied $1 million fine on this company and almost shut them down in trading in China. So we feel that it's actually got to be a discussion at C-suite, at leadership level, in terms of, do we have the correct process? Are we consulting with the correct experts? Do we have these entities? What is our plan to get across border? And then to also give the appropriate budgets, because nobody wants to pay, but at the end of the day, if you don't do it properly, and between all the tariffs that Michelle mentioned, and the supply chain that Simon mentioned, you've got to be able to funnel down the appropriate budgets as well. So we're definitely seeing a lot of things happening in the global market.
I mean, I
Just-
think you're
just
raising a
sorry,
very interesting.
Sorry,
Simon, let me just. Yeah.
Sorry, go on, Yvonne.
But I'm just when I'm listening to you, Noah, I'm thinking we just had we were talking to a company from Germany. They were creating a robotic device, and they were not planning to make this a robotic device in the US, but they wanted to ship it to the US. And I'm thinking they need to calculate into their strategy the cost and the operational backbone that they need to create in order to calculate the business potential of the U.S. market, because they won't be able to ship neither the robot nor the parts into the U.S.
100%.
or elsewhere.
100%. And one of the things in the white paper that came out in the research is that you're looking at like a minimum of a 15% uplift in cost to cross border. And this is something that companies, even if you roll it back to an investment. So there's a lot of funding going into offshore data centers and into the AI space. And one of the things that's not being taken into account in the investment and the funding is the cost of transferring across borders. And what happens is that it's then left to, as I said, the team on the ground who doesn't have a budget for it, and it either ends up costing the company a lot more, and then their profit margin obviously decreases, or they actually cannot even go to market. So they end up having a loss, or they're not able to get themselves off the ground in a timely manner. And it actually puts a risk on that initial investment. So 100%, it's something that's got to be taken into account, which is why, again, we really feel the importance is to roll it back to leadership in a company.
Yeah.
And it's got to really be a discussion at that point.
Yeah, I thought they're just going to have a problem, taking this thing apart or shipping it as one piece. But Simon, you had a comment.
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback on what Noah was saying with regards to regulatory compliance, taking that into consideration, and then linking that with supply chain disruption. Because even if you have all your ducks in a row and you've crossed every T and dotted every I as you need to do, the actions of other importers can directly affect you as well. So, there's a recent situation in the US where eye drops imported from India were contaminated and resulted in some deaths. And now every single importer of eye drops into the US is now inspected, stopped by customs, and to ensure compliance. So this just sort of like adds to the complexity, adds to to the supply chain issues. And to my point earlier, it's like nothing exists in a vacuum. And we're impacted by not only our own actions or inactions, but those of others.
Yeah, and yeah, that's a very good point, because you're in the larger environment of what's happening at customs, and then, like you just pointed out, somebody's doing something wrong, and then all of a sudden the focus is on a particular product.
Right.
And a lot, from my understanding, has to do with the right declaration of certain items, and parts taken apart or not. Give us some. We have about 20 minutes left. If you could, all give us a few examples on, best practices and specific challenges that certain industries are facing, and what you've seen. Noah and Michelle, supplies for clinical trials, or medical devices. What are some of the best practices and common mistakes that you have seen? And Michelle, if you wanna start on that.
Sure. I'll start by saying I completely agree with Noah and Simon. There is no more important compliance measure than having top-down support. If you don't have the top-down support, it's just not going to be effective. And we've seen this over and over and over again with large companies, small companies. It doesn't really matter. We're seeing penalties as high as $3 million, where it's not an egregious error. I've got a $3 million penalty where the company completely inadvertently had some incorrect data, and it resulted in both overpayments and underpayments. So clearly no fraud, right? And Customs still stuck with that $3 million. So in addition to the top-down support, Customs can go back 5 years. There's a 5-year statute of limitations and a 5-year record keeping requirement, as well as record keeping penalties. So one of the easiest things you can do is keep complete and accurate records and have them readily accessible, because Customs could stop you at any time and ask you for a document. And if you don't have it, well, then they begin to ask for more. And that's where the penalties begin to rack up.
But it tells me, that get your ducks in a row and create awareness up and down the chain about the requirements. So, and it's what Simon is said he's doing when he's onboarding clients. Noah, do you have that benefit? Are companies coming to you and before they got into trouble, or do you see companies coming to you after they got into trouble?
So definitely both. So
Okay, good.
obviously we say good practice. You want to talk about good practice is we always say come before you've even scoped out your project. So in other words, if you're looking to move it into, another country, your equipment or your goods or whatever it is, scope out the project first, come to us, let us do a compliance check, because there are so many limitations depending on the product, on the country. I mean, I recently had a shipment and it contained some medical equipment, but one of the things was saline. And it was going, if I'm not mistaken, to Qatar or one of the, one of the Middle Eastern countries. And there was actually, we weren't able to import it because it required an extremely difficult license, because something as simple as saline was seen as medical, and it's very product specific and very country specific. So we always say come beforehand. But with that said, I think because there isn't this awareness, and most people really do believe that it's like shipping from New York to the West Coast. They literally will just do it. They want to do it the cheapest way possible. So they don't want to pay for expertise. And then we are seeing where they come to us because their goods are stuck in customs. And often that's too late. We cannot help at that point. I've had cases, it was with Mexico not that long ago, where a company had 5 or 6 different shipments sent to Mexico. And they were eventually abandoned by customs and FedEx because we could not intercept in the middle. Because what happens is that your documents, and this is very important, your documents have to be really up to date and before it gets to the foreign country, before it reaches customs. Once it reaches customs and you don't have the correct documents, that's considered a stuck shipment. That becomes very difficult and costly to fix. So we always say, don't wait. It's always better to obviously scope out the project and determine, can you actually even execute such a project.
Yeah, you had mentioned during the at the briefings that there's some best practices around moving product for clinical trials.
Yeah, so 100%. So we have a medical division that does a lot of medical trials. And again, that's also very specific, because obviously when it comes to pharmaceuticals, there's a whole nother division of regulations. And, as Simon mentioned with the eye drops, it's, anything getting involved where it can cause health issues, besides customs, you're going to have local regulations on the medical, on the pharmaceutical side. So again, it's very country specific. We see that some countries require, a certain types of imports and permits and licenses. Other countries don't allow you at all. So it's the same thing with, I think on the pharmaceutical is very much dependent what's it coming in for. Is it coming in for trial? Is it coming in for resell into the market? And there's both permits and licenses and regulatory requirements on the export, the import, and then the use in country.
Yeah. And Simon, how about food-related compliance? I'm sure you see a lot on that.
Yeah, so I mean, absolutely. So Food and Drug Administration is very vigilant on foodstuffs coming into the US, or any product. So, yeah, and they cover the eye drops as well, but any product that touches or is involved with the human body, interior or exterior. And so I think I want to sort of like again double down on what Michelle and Noah were saying, is that you have to be proactive. If you become reactive and it's already in country at the border stopped, the risk of fines, the risk of destruction of the goods, just increases exponentially. And so, and I think sort of like my advice and my guidance to anyone listening is work with the experts, be proactive. And so one of my favorite quotes is, if you think working with an expert is expensive, wait till you work with an amateur. And I think it can be very, very expensive not to work with the professionals, not to again dot your I's, cross your T's, and ensure there is compliance. As Michelle said, that there is an increase in cost. She mentioned 15%. There is an increase in cost in cross-border. You have to take this into consideration, and you have to ensure that all the appropriate agencies are taken into your documents cover the requirements of those agencies. and you need to do it proactively prior to export from the country of origin.
Yeah, and it should be much easier to you know, if you prepare, you know, all the documents that you need to have and all the licenses that you need to get, it's much easier to calculate that because it's a known number. You know what that cost is. It's much easier to calculate that into the price and into your overall, you know, product pricing for export and internally, etc. So it's much easier to calculate than dealing with a $3 million fine or destruction of the product, because what are you going to do then?
Yeah, absolutely. Or you know, enforced relabeling of the product because it's not labeled correctly, or the documents are you know, don't have the appropriate you know, currency, right? So something as simple as currency, right? The documents, invoices need to be you know, in US dollars, not in euros or in British pounds or whatever the case may be. So you know, just everything up front, proactive to ensure smooth transition through customs. But then, as I said previously, just because you've done it previously and it's worked doesn't mean it's correct. And there's a 5-year clawback that customs, you know, has, you know, can and does, as Michelle outlined, will enforce, you know, should they find an issue with anything that's being imported into the US.
Yeah, that's for sure. Michelle and Nora, restrictions on certain technology products. You mentioned the extraterritorial jurisdictions. Can you elaborate on that? And I think maybe Michelle wants to start on that.
Oh yeah, that one, that's really big right now. So there are many restrictions on technology exports, of course, and it's not a matter of privacy where you know, I've seen a lot in the EU, they're concerned about privacy. What the US is mainly concerned about is the release of technology. And so drawings, blueprints, designs, even discussions can result in what is actually defined as an export and can be penalized. So BIS under the Commerce Department, together with OFAC under the Treasury Department, will come after that sort of thing. And if they think that you've released technology without the proper license, you will end up under investigation. The interesting thing about extraterritorial jurisdiction is that OFAC can find any connection. It could be where the server's located, it could be one employee, could be someone signed a contract and they were a US person. Any nexus with the US allows OFAC to gain jurisdiction. And furthermore, they can add foreign companies to a list of secondary sanctions. So if a foreign company, a non-US company, is deemed to be complying with or non-compliant, I should say, with US sanctions, US export restrictions, that company too can be listed as a denied party. There are many tools to use to look at this. We have denied party screening, we've got benchmarking software. We have a software that's kind of like an ancestry.com where you can get a complete family tree of a company. And that type of due diligence is critical at this point. It's basically, it's not 1985 anymore. It's 2024, and things have to be taken seriously in international trade at this point. So
yeah, it's interesting because I'm just thinking, Noah, you know, if you send a piece of technology across borders for installation and I mean, we keep on getting back to the data centers, that piece of technology may come with circuitry information and you know, how to plug it into you know, into the rest of the data center, or you know, wherever it you know, the circuit board that it needs to be sitting on or attached to. How is one to deal with that? I mean,
so again, I think it's very much country dependent. So, and where the technology is going. Obviously, there's some countries that are, you know, they want to have they want the data centers to come in. They want to build out technology in their countries. So they very much want to have this technology come in, but it's just regulated. And that's part of the due diligence, I think, that is done very proactively. And when you decide to go into a foreign market, is to determine, is it an issue? I mean, often also with some countries, especially in the APAC region, it's who is the end user? You know, the end user in country has to be better. That becomes, you know, again, part of the due diligence that a company would do. And I think it's just things that, it's not to say it can't be done, it's just a matter of really just understanding the markets, understanding the products, and where you're going. And there are, I mean, at the same time, I think I know in Africa, there's been quite a lot of conferences around this, but the companies do want the growth. They do want the, you know, the Amazons, the Microsofts, the Oracles to come in and build out data centers. It's just got to be done in a manner that's not, you know, they've got to be able to protect the fact that it's not going to come in and be used for terrorism. It's not going to be coming and used for you know, military uprisings. And I think that's when it comes to technology, it's what they call the dual purpose of the equipment that becomes scrutinized. So in other words, if it can be used, you know, for terrorism and the likes of that, there's generally, you know, stricter permits and stricter regulations that are required, but it doesn't mean it cannot necessarily be done.
Yeah, interesting. Simon, you wanted to talk a little bit about supply chain reliability and planning.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to contradict myself because at the beginning of this webinar, I said that the transatlantic is a well-established, stable supply chain. We're less than 2 weeks from a potential strike by U.S. dock workers on the eastern seaboard and U.S. Gulf ports, which should have an enormous economic impact to the U.S. and anyone importing into the U.S. or exporting from. So I think, you know, supply chain reliability is, you know, is the word du jour. It is something that anyone involved in international trade needs to be alive to, needs to be cognizant of, because we're living in an ever shifting environment, and so, you know, my message is work with the experts, ensure you have the appropriate information, whether it be regulatory, whether it be supply chain related, to ensure that you can make the best and appropriate decisions to ensure that your goods get to market, and get to market in a timely manner, without the disruptions and or, God forbid, fines or destruction of goods because you're not doing things appropriately.
Yeah. I think with that, we have 3 minutes to go. Final words. Noah, do you want to, what's the takeaway that you want our audience to walk away with?
So thank you, Yvonne. So I think takeaway from my side is that, yes, there's a lot of regulations. It's quite a difficult landscape to navigate, but don't fear. And you know, as Simon said, you consult with the experts, you put the appropriate resources in place. Don't shy away from paying, you know, to have the experts guide you through the process. It can be done. And I think that today we're in a global market. So you want to be out there to be able to grow your business. But it's, I think for me, the biggest takeaway is it's got to be a discussion at leadership level, CEO leadership level, and then they kind of funnel it down to the appropriate people in the business. But it can be done, and it's something that, you know, it's what's building out the world and the economy and the AI and all that.
Very good. Michelle?
Plan ahead. Plan ahead. The trend that I'm seeing with my clients is overwhelmingly planning for compliance from the outset, early, even at the design phase. When you're designing your products, if you don't want it to be controlled, talk to an expert and find out how you can build that product so it's not controlled. But certainly don't go in blind. It's there's too much to know, and I think consulting with experts like Simon, Noah. We're all a team in this. We're all together, and the EU and the US are in fact aligned. So I would say plan ahead and ask the right people.
Very good. Simon?
Yeah, I mean, I can't add too much more other than agreeing with both Michelle and Noah is plan ahead, work with the experts, and the US is an incredibly valuable market. So the squeeze is worth the juice, as they say. It is worth the investment. It is worth putting in the time and effort. This is an incredible market. The center of global trade, both import and export. Thank you, Yvonne.
Very good. I've never heard that expression. I absolutely love it. I'm going to quote you on that. So and I think also one final thought, don't cut corners.
100%.
Yeah, very, very important, because if you do, you get caught, it's going to be really, really expensive.
Yeah, don't go on the cheap.
Yeah, don't go on the cheap. That's for sure. And do get help. Do get help from the EAN advisors. Do get help from us on the other side. Ask for help. And don't be foolish on what Noah just said on doing it on the cheap. Cheap is expensive. And so with that, we reached the end of today's program. Thank you to our panel. Thank you to ESMA, the team around Thomas, and for collaborating with us on this program. And I said it privately to some of the attendees. If you would like a copy of the presentation, please reach out to us. My email address is on the screen. And just a word on the next program. It will be the next one organized by the EACC network in the US. It will be October 17th, hosted by our colleagues in Texas on immigration issues, very important subject. And with that, I hand over to Christos Skouras at DG Grow for final thoughts.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to have these final words from our side. My name is Christos. I work in the European Commission in DG Grow. It's the unit responsible for the industrial forum alliances and clusters. Very briefly, I would like to thank you, Yvonne, and the European American Chamber of Commerce of New York, and of course our esteemed panelists, Michelle, Noah, and Simon, for their very constructive feedback and very comprehensive, but also very realistic overview of the complexity, I understand, of the whole system. I mean, I would like to have this positive note from my side as well, because it might be discouraging for companies when they are faced with all these different regulations, very different in the EU, very different in the US, and they are trying to find the compliance between the two. It's very difficult for them. Imagine for very small companies, it seems like it's almost impossible. So this positive note that they need to plan ahead is something that they can help. It can help them really go over these obstacles and do something which is really good for them. And as it was already mentioned, the US market, of course, is extraordinary and full of opportunities for the European companies. I would like also to mention that this webinar today comes in a very timely point, because maybe you have heard we have a new commission, a new College of Commissioners, which was very recently announced by Ursula von der Leyen. Again, there we have like three very core, let's say, values, which are highlighted by our president, which is democracy, competitiveness, and of course, we need to be able to foresee economic development for our companies. One of the things that I can see as positive from the side of the EU is that there is a very intense effort, as I see already in the mission letters, send to the new commissioners of simplifying regulatory frameworks, of having a better and more simplified access to third markets out of the EU. So I'm confident that this might already have an impact in the very complex, as already mentioned, transatlantic commerce, which can be very, very valuable and fruitful for our companies, both sides mutually beneficial. We also heard that during the panel that global supply chain disruptions persist. I still see a lot of potential for the US market in this respect, because the EU companies seek to diversify their supply chains. Okay, let's not hide, they're mostly trying to move away from China, and I see a lot of opportunity in the US market in this respect, because they are trying to identify new sourcing patterns, including near shoring and reshoring, which was also mentioned during the panel. I would like also just not to take more time to invite all the participants and also thank them for participating in this webinar to our next one on the 17th of October for US immigration rules. I think that, as I said before, and I'm kind of repeating myself, this is a very, very important and very successful, I believe, and effective series of webinars with you. We very much appreciate this effort. It really has given so much insight into the US market, its specificities, its complexities, its opportunities, its challenges. Thank you very much. That's all from my side.
Thank you, Christos. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank
Ivan, for
you.
giving us this opportunity.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.